What's up and welcome to KplusGaming Corner, and in this Remnant 2 video, we're setting everything on fire with an updated status effect build, this time dipping into some pyromancy and blazing our trail across the battlefield. This one might be a little different to some of the other Ritualist status effect builds I've seen out there, so let's not waste any more time and get right into it. Starting with our Archetype classes, we're going with the Ritualist as our main, of course, and for our secondary, we're going with the Engineer class. Once again, our prime perk is going to be Vile, which causes our status effect damage to make enemies infected, which means on death, they're going to be spreading the fire and burning dot ticks to enemies nearby. The Wrath damage perk is causing all enemies affected by status effects to take 20% more damage, plus we're getting a 10% increase to crit chance. The Purge Relic perk is also pretty useful since now, whenever you heal yourself, any negative status effects you have on your character will be purged and instead applied to all enemies within 7.5 meters. For the Ritualist skill, my preference is always Miasma, since with this, we're casting a huge AoE blast that's applying burning, bleeding, overloaded, and corroded damage, and it lasts 20 seconds. For the Ritualist archetype trait, we get Affliction, which is doubling the duration of the status effects we're applying, which means enemies are going to be burning a lot longer. For the Engineer class, we're using the Flamethrower, no surprise there since this is a Pyromancer build. This comes in really handy as it's tossing out fire bombs and helping to get that fire and burn out there and clear the battlefield faster. Also really important is the Metalworker damage perk, which is increasing our skill damage by 50% and skill crit chance by 10%, making both Miasma and the Flamethrower that much more effective. Looking at our amulets, there's a few different ways you could go with these. The obvious choice most would make in a build like this would be to go with the Talisman of the Sun, which is increasing fire damage by 20% and burning damage by 50%. Clearly a great amulet to have here since we're flaming everything in our path and we want to maximize as much fire and burning damage as possible. However, my preference here is actually the Energized Net Coil, which increases status effect damage by 25%, plus the added bonus that whenever we apply status effects onto an enemy, we're creating a 5-meter explosion doing a decent amount of damage, and each target can be affected every 5 seconds. So along with the dot ticks going off, this gives us another way to chip away at enemies. You'll clear most of them without much hassle, and it's great for getting rid of elites and bosses a little bit faster. The Energized Net Coil can be found while exploring the labyrinth, so you'll have to be in the main campaign for this one, but well worth searching for as it's a great addition to any status effect build. The choice is yours with that one. Let me know in the comments which amulet you prefer, or if you have another one you'd recommend in the fire status build. As I always say, all ideas and suggestions are welcome. Moving over to the rings, for my 4, I've chosen the Firestone, which increases fire damage by 10% and gives you a little fire resistance. The Singed Ring, which increases all damage dealt to burning enemies by 10%. I'm going with the Cataloger's Jewel, which is giving us some mod power generation, so we're passively generating mod power every second, which comes in really handy with the weapon mods, which I'll get to shortly. And then I go with the Band of the Fanatic, which is increasing status effect damage by 25%. The lower status effect duration isn't as bad here since we have multiple ways of applying burn consistently and we're always reapplying, and other than bosses and elites, most enemies will melt so fast you'll barely notice the shorter duration anyway. Some other rings to consider would be the Shadow of Misery, which increases status effect damage by 15%. Lighthouse Keeper's Ring could also be nice since you're generating some mod power per status effects you're inflicting. Red Ring of Death is also one to consider, and Stone of Malevolence would also be really useful with what we have going on. For the weapons, this one's really flexible. I'm running with the Chicago Typewriter, and then I have the Hot Shots mod, which imbues your ammo with fire and applies burn damage. You could make the case that the Sparkfire Shotgun would be as good or maybe even a better choice for this build, and it's a great option if you can get your hands on it. But for me, I like the increased range and ammo capacity I get with the Chicago Typewriter, although the Sparkfire does give you more flexibility since you wouldn't need to use the Hot Shots mod and could instead free that slot for another mod of your choosing. I'm using the Fetid Wounds Mutator, which increases the crit chance of this weapon per unique status effect applied on the enemy, and when maxed out, this Mutator causes your weak spot and crit hits to apply Corroded, so a nice way to sneak in some more unique status effects. For the handgun, I'm of course using the Hellfire, which is basically a flamethrower, so another way to consistently apply burning to enemies getting too close to us. And then I have the Maelstrom Mutator, which increases the weapon's elemental damage by 10% for each unique status effect you're applying to enemies, and at max level, you're increasing mod power generation and increasing status damage by another 20%. I don't really melee too much with this build, but I do have on Smolder just in case. If I'm being swarmed, I'll have another way to burn enemies and get them off me, plus I think it looks cool when you're swinging it around. I'm using the salvage heart again for the 50% increased use speed bonus, and then I've included some extra skill damage, mod and skill cast speed, which is important to me. I can't do miasma or deploy my turret at the base speed. That'll get you killed in most situations, so whenever I'm running the engineer or using miasma, any cast speed bonuses I can fit in can be a lifesaver. If relic use speed isn't a concern for you though, I'd also recommend the Runed Heart, which both heals you and gives a nice amount of mod power generation on relic use. It's great for ensuring you'll always have the Hot Shots mod active. I just can't with the regular slow ass healing speed, but if it works for you, or if you decide to go with the Celerity Stone instead of one of the other rings I suggested, this might actually be the better relic to use. Let me know down below which relic you'd prefer, or if you have another suggestion. The trait points, as usual, are up to you to spec into as you see fit. This is how I have mine set up for this build, and I must say, I do appreciate that now with the Orb of Undoing, we can reset our trait points and experiment as much as we like, whereas before, you had to keep purchasing the orb from Wallace, and I remember it being pretty expensive. I do recommend Flashcaster so you can hit your miasma and get your turrets out quicker, Amplitude for the larger AoE size, which helps both miasma and the energized net coil, and then I always try to include swiftness for some extra movement speed. But that's me, I say go with what works best for you. So there you have it, Vile Wrecker Pyromancer build that'll be way too hot to handle for most enemies, even on Apocalypse difficulty. Let me know down in the comments if you're running a similar build to this and how you have yours set up, and also if you have any questions on where to find some of the rings, amulets, or weapons that I mentioned. Love sharing ideas with you guys, so looking forward to hearing from you. Thanks so much for watching if you made it this far, and do give this video a thumbs up if you haven't already. It's all good, I forget to hit that like button too sometimes, but definitely hit that on your way out as it helps out the channel and would be greatly appreciated by yours truly. And if you enjoyed this video or found it helpful, please consider subscribing and ringing that notification bell to make sure you're getting all the updates on when I'm going live or dropping new videos. I'll catch you guys on the next one. Until then, peace!